week. So this stuff is very new because I was going to publish a blog about how it all works with the function calling in AI. But so it's very fresh, new content.
Okay, so we are on time, so let me kick this off. Uh, Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here for our latest Sitecore user group meetup in Jaipur. Today, we are excited and honored to have Dalan Young with us, a very well-known face of the Sitecore community. As a five-time Sitecore MVP and a technical director at Voltec, Dalan has a wealth of experience to share with us. So in today's session, we are hoping to learn more about the Sitecore Personalization SDK. So I would like to hand over the session to Dylan, and Dylan, you may begin your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Sumit. So let's get started. Let me shrink that down. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about unleashing personalization. I'll be talking about this deep dive into the Sitecore Personalized SDK. You probably never heard of this because it's something I've built. So it's not something that's released by Sitecore, and I'll talk a little bit about the APIs that it's built upon. This kind of it's part of the journey I've been going down since I worked at Sitecore. I worked with the personalized product. And originally, a couple of years ago, I created a serialization tool. It was, never fully baked product or tool to use, but um, it kind of matches that journey that I was going down around the same sort of APIs that I was using for the serializer for Sitecore Personalize. But I wanted to create an SDK because then it would enable not just the serialization, but other types of cool functionality, which I'll be demonstrating today. So let's jump in. So before I jump in, Summit gave a pretty good description of who I am. You've probably seen my face in places. So I am a technical director at Valtech. I was a former five-time Sitecore technology MVP before I joined Sitecore. So I was working at Sitecore from, I think it was like late 2021 till about June of this year. My role there was developer advocate, and my real focus there was Sitecore Personalize and CDP, kind of working with those products. Unfortunately, I was let go. Wasn't anything to do with my performance. It was just reorganization inside Sitecore. They kind of got rid of their DevRel, or a lot of their DevRel folks. There's still folks there like Sebastian and Rob, but people like Jason St. Cyr and myself and Thomas Desmond all were unfortunately let go. So it's just what it is. But I've landed at Valtech, so it's not a big deal. But I've kind of continued that journey. I figured, I might as well go back into the community and go back to doing Sitecore personalized stuff even further than I was. And what's great about being back in the community is that I can pretty much do whatever I want now. I mean, there was always time conflicts and things like that when I worked at Sitecore, so I couldn't really dive deep into a specific subject. I had to kind of shift on to new topics all the time. So I've been working with Sitecore for 10 years. As of July of this year, I hit the 10-year anniversary of working with Sitecore. And I live in the United States in South Florida. So the agenda for today is follows. I'm gonna do a quick kind of intro into Sitecore Personalize for anybody that's not familiar with the product. It's been around for a while, so I hope there's um, quite a few people that are familiar with it. Then I'm gonna talk about the Sitecore Personalize SDK and where it comes from, how you can get it. It's a work in progress, so there's opportunities to contribute to it. And I'm going to go into this generative AI use case that uses the Sitecore Personalized SDK, and shows off kind of a pretty cool AI function calling use case that you can do once you have the ability to create assets and things like that with the SDK. And then I'll talk a little bit about additional use cases that are possible with the SDK. But there's a lot of things that I can't think of, and that's why I wanted to create the SDK, was so that others could, create their specific use cases as well. So product overview, what is personalized? I'll talk about capabilities and the options or flavors of personalize. So we've all seen this a bunch of times, this kind of diagram, just to kind of pick it apart a little bit to talk about exactly what we're talking about today. The stream APIs, we won't be covering these today. These are essentially how you consume or ingest data, guest data into your Sitecore personalized product. Same sort of stream APIs that exist for CDP as well. There are already an SDK for this product or this API. That would be the Engage SDK, or if you're using Sitecore or XM Cloud, that would be the Cloud SDK. But either way, the SDK that exists for that API is already pretty fully feature complete. It's built by Sitecore themselves, so I would never attempt to replace that SDK, because it just wouldn't make any sense for me to do that. It would make more sense to just make suggestions to the product team. The other one is obviously in the middle, you have what I'm going to talk about on the next slide is the capabilities of Sitecore Personalize, the testing, the decisioning, the experiences, etc. The real core capabilities of Sitecore Personalize itself. And then you have kind of another communication stream that comes out of Sitecore Personalized product is the triggered experiences. So if you have a triggered experience in Sitecore Personalized, you can essentially, based on specific actions that happen, like such as a session end, you can then send messages out to external systems. We're not going to talk about that one either. I don't think it makes sense really to build an SDK for that. But what we're going to talk about today is the one that's on the bottom right, the REST API for A/B tests and personalized experiences. So as of today, there is no SDK for that. If you are going to create anything that uses that, you'd have to implement the APIs yourself in your product or tool, whatever you're trying to use. And I will also note that there was a time when these weren't really even documented by Sitecore. So it was one of the things I was pushing for when I worked at Sitecore, was to just document these. And they're pretty much APIs that exist within the tool when you're interacting with the application itself. These APIs are firing behind the scenes, and it's about trying to use these. I always had a vision of what these could be useful for. Ways to automate creating of experiences or decision models, etc. And so that's what we're going to talk about. There's no SDK except for the SDK I'm talking about. The one I'm talking about is Node, but there's opportunities if you wanted to build ones for .NET or whatever. You could build those as well, or maybe I will at some point. So just to fill in some extra space into this presentation, just for those that aren't aware of the capabilities of Sitecore Personalize, it has the capabilities of or personalization itself, obviously, as the name of the product indicates. It's all about using web, full stack, or interactive kind of options. So there's three different options of ways you can personalize the experience. Web is where you drop um, custom JavaScript, custom HTML on top of the loaded website or loaded web page, and then you can personalize based upon that asset that's kind of dropped in. There's also the full stack, which is where your application just calls an API and it makes a decision. You can pass additional details about what you want it to decide. Maybe you want to pass it an ID or some sort of user interaction or something like that, and you can pass that into the full stack interactive experience. it can have that full stack interactive experience, can have a decision model or whatever that you want, and it can make a decision and then return that as a JSON response back to the user. And then the other one, which I mentioned just a second ago, was triggered, which is where based on a certain action happening, maybe session end, there's a few others, I believe, you can then trigger some sort of communication to an external third-party system. This is useful if you want to send on session end, you want to send an email using another product like Send. You can do that with a triggered experience. Experimentation just is pretty much just like personalization, except for the big difference wasn't so much a long time ago, but now with a personalization, you can only create one variant. With experimentation, you can create multiple variants, and those variances you basically are testing them against each other and determining which one is the winner. And then both personalization or experiences and experimentation, you can do decision models on top of it. And that's a great way for you to either make very, precise decisions based on data in the user profile, the guest profile, or even connecting to external systems to bring back specific content that you can deliver to that specific customer. All right. And so then I created this slide. Some of these slides I was going to do for another presentation, and then I was like, well, let's build this one instead. And so this talks a little bit about flavors of personalize or personalization in general, options that are available. I'm not going to talk about CDP because CDP adds even more of these. And just makes it more complicated. So XP, this is what we all know and love from the old Sitecore days. I'm losing my voice this morning, but um, so but the huge limitations with XP that probably everybody's aware of is just the infrastructure, and maintaining XDB is quite complex. I can't tell you how many customers I've come into where they're complaining that their reporting doesn't work. And usually it's, some sort of the processing doesn't work or isn't configured correctly. So um, that's the biggest challenge with XP. I love the product. It's a very feature-rich product compared to some of these other products where you have to do a lot of customizations out of the box to get them to behave like XP. So XP is a very powerful product, but it just comes with that biggest caveat of it's expensive to run XP. It's also very complex to run. You're basically running a CDP product um, in your own infrastructure. So then, kind of the journey to XM Cloud, this kind of talks about migration a little bit as well. If you're thinking about getting to XM Cloud, some customers can start right from XM Cloud, obviously, but if you're on the journey from XP to XM Cloud, then you might start right in the middle there with XM plus personalized. So you might downgrade, reduce the costs of using personalization or running XDB, and you might go to XM. I see this a lot with customers that are not using XP for personalization. So why spend all the money to support XDB when you're not using it? So in a lot of cases, it makes sense to then downgrade to XM. And if you're still hoping to do personalization, going to something like XM plus personalize makes a lot of sense. Um, it does require a little bit of customization, especially if you're using a lot of the features of XP and you're trying to go to an XM plus personalized scenario. Then, if you're doing pattern profile cards as an example of something I presented earlier this year, there's a lot to do to get that set up to work in your specific use case. It's actually probably the reason why I see some customers using XP plus personalize. I didn't mention it here, but they're slowly migrating to an XM plus personalize, but they're still using XP alongside personalize because they're on the they're migrating slowly to that. Um, Obviously, XM Cloud is in there. Some customers started XM Cloud. Like if you have new customers today, usually they'll go just XM Cloud unless there's some sort of reason why they're avoiding SaaS. Um, and it's a great tool. It comes with obviously personalized out of the box. I know there's also roadmap for experimentation. I don't know. That's very close to coming out. I don't know. Unfortunately, not peer review to the timelines anymore. So I just know that that's coming out very soon. I know that they've been testing that, um, and probably will announce it some at Symposium as well. Wouldn't be surprised. But the biggest challenge with XM Cloud, if you just have XM Cloud by itself, is that you have limited tracking capabilities, and the personalization is also very limited. I mean, there's some decent rules in there, but it's a good starting point for customers. And then obviously, if you graduate and you want to do more advanced scenarios, you're going to be looking at something like XM Cloud plus Personalize. Really, it's the best of both worlds. It's all SaaS, obviously. You don't have to deal with infrastructure concerns, and you know, there's a lot of customization that's required, but you can do a lot of the very advanced scenarios for the product. All right, so that's an overview of Sitecore Personalize. I just wanted to put that in there just to add some context of what Sitecore Personalize is, if, in case anybody's not aware. But now let's get back to the heart of this presentation, which is talking about Sitecore Personalize, the SDK. So let's talk about what it is and how do you get it. So, like I mentioned previous, the APIs for managing the Sitecore personalized assets, or templates, experiences, decision models, all of those things that you manage within Sitecore Personalize itself. This these this SDK represents, a wrapper for those APIs. Is essentially what it is. Um, and it's not to be confused with the CDP REST API. So there's CDP REST APIs are also considered or called interactive APIs. Those are more for managing guest data. This API is not for managing the guest data at all. So if you need to capture events, like I said, if you're trying to use something like the Stream APIs, there's a great SDK for that, and you should definitely use the Engage SDK. It's available on NPM. I realize that's not an actual link, but there's an actual link later on in the presentation. But I assume I'll share this deck. Actually, there's going to be a page on my personal blog where you can download the deck at any point. So it's available on NPM, and it's still a work in progress, but it does do a lot of things well as of today, a lot better than having to develop the against the APIs directly. I will say it makes a lot of sense to build an SDK for these APIs because these APIs are very picky about the data that you send to them. So my goal is to build an SDK that's very simple to use. You don't need to necessarily worry about some of the obscure things that you need to pass into. For example, when you're creating events or creating experiences, there's some obscure data that you need to send it just to create the experience. And so my goal is to make it as simple for the user of the SDK to create an experience without having to know all these obscure requirements for the create, for example. It supports only the Cloud Portal instances of Personalize is timely done because they just kind of cut off all the box ever old environments they used to have. And what this really means is that there's a set of for the cloud portal is a set of client ID secrets that you get, and I'll be showing that today in the presentation. that uses those specifically. There's another way to authenticate for box ever tenants that I'm not showing, and this doesn't currently support. And as I said, it sounds like they're pretty much decommissioning all the old box ever. Really, they're just getting rid of the way to access through app.boxever, and they're just going to make it so everybody accesses through Cloud Portal. And like I said, it's open source. Anybody wants to contribute, you feel free to message me. I don't really have an issues yet, but over time, I'm sure if this becomes more popular, I mean, like I said, this is a first time presenting this topic, so it's very new, very fresh. I've been blogging about it, but that's it. So I expect it to grow in time. And who would use it? Really, I'm going to show some of the use cases today of who might want to create these assets. But if you want to build an experience on the fly programmatically, that's one use case. But there's a lot of use cases where you might want to programmatically create, these assets in Sitecore Personalize. So let's talk through. I just have a few slides here where I show some code and I show exactly how you would use the SDK. It's pretty straightforward, honestly. So we'll get through these fairly quickly. So authentication and initialization really is as simple as going to Sitecore Personalize, and you can create a developer token. I've created a few blogs about this in the past where you can get these developer generated tokens from Sitecore Personalize. You can see that there's a lot of products in the cloud portal now that have these ways that you can create, these programmatic ways of developing with the product. So Sitecore Personalize is no different. You need to know your region. In my case, I'm using one that's in Europe. And you know, you need to download the package from npm, and then you just initialize with the example I have here. You just put the client init options, and then you pass it into the client class, and then you can then use this personalized client. Pretty straightforward. And it handles all the authentication and keeping the tokens, the auth tokens refreshed and everything. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. If you want to work with developer templates, these being like web decision templates, conditions, JS modules, things like that, this probably is the part of the SDK that's the most built out, because a lot of this came from the serializer that I worked on 2 years ago, where there's a pretty good, scenarios for just serializing templates and moving them around. So to use, you just call client dot templates, and then there's various CRUD operations. I will admit that the SDK is not well documented as of right now. That's something on my list to do. So hopefully in time I'll get that fully documented out, and then that will be simpler to use. But if in this use case or the code sample, I'm just getting all web templates. So there's just get all, and then you can pass in what types you're looking for. There's a few other optional parameters on the get all, like ways to paginate the results. But I didn't show it in this use case. But I have found that as I navigate these APIs as well, just on a side note, is that which is documented isn't always accurate. So I'm hoping to build an SDK that's fully, has a bunch of capabilities that maybe aren't documented as well. So then there's flows. Flows are essentially basically what Sitecore Personalize internally calls experiences and experiments. I've heard some talk about them removing this name, or changing or restructuring this, but as of now, it's just called a flow as an experience and experiment. They're the same object. Um, but in the SDK, I've tried to make it super simple to create or create an experience or an experiment by using internally, I'm using Zod to add validation. So if you're creating a experience, it's going to validate that you're providing the right data for an experience. And then if you're creating an experiment, then it's going to validate that you're setting the right data for an experiment. It's complicated because the object is very different. Like this flow definition is much different for an experiment versus an experience. Um, and I'm glad I'm finally getting into it now. I wanted to do this at Sitecore, but it took a lot of focus to figure out what is required and what is not. And like I said, what you're passing in here for this test experience, there's only a few fields here, but in the SDK, the code is passing in even more fields that are kind of standard for the experience, and then the same for the experiment. I wrote a blog about this specific topic. I haven't covered experiments yet. Technically, probably experiments don't work as of right now. It's my next one to take on, and I'll probably write a blog about that when I do that. Decision models, this is another one that's still a work in progress. So decision models are inside Sitecore Personalize. There's kind of the model itself, and then there's variances that exist for the model. And inside that object, there is essentially something called decision model and notation that they use, which basically defines the canvas that you have. All the elements that you have on that canvas is defined in essentially an XML format. Um, so even though I haven't actually tested out what a crate might look like, you would be essentially responsible for passing in this kind of XML format to create to create a decision model. So hopefully I'll be showing a good use case of this in the future. I do think this is where AI can be very powerful because it can suggest the XML format that you're looking for. I actually did a test. I'm not demoing it today, but I did a test. I took a decision model variant. I had the XML format for that. And then I asked ChatGPT to essentially create an additional node inside that. And it did a really good job. I was able to um, create that fairly simple. So I'm hopeful I'll have a use case or a full-on POC demo for that at some point, because that was just kind of like a one-off scenario. But the idea is have the SDK enable that. Um, all right, so that takes us on. So those are all the, how to use the SDK if you wanted to use it. And so now I'm going to go into the Gen AI use case. So the power of this demonstration is I'm using Gen AI's function calling. If you've never used function calling, it's really awesome what that can do. Uh, it's weird because I haven't seen many people talking about it, but it's probably one of the biggest, uh, biggest wins when it comes to Gen AI that I've seen. So let's go on to this slide. So what is Open AI function calling? And I say Open AI function calling, but there's other models that or LLMs that do the same, have the same concept. Now for my demonstration, I'm using the node-based OpenAI SDK. Um, so it's specific functions tied to OpenAI, but you could, if you wanted to, use Gemini or something else, then I'm sure they have their own SDKs to achieve. But it's about this concept of, having generative AI or your LLM help you, define the parameters of a function. So the way it works is you provide the parameters of a function to Gen AI. You say, well, I need to create an experience. These are the parameters that I'm looking for. And you pass that to Gen AI essentially and say, okay, these are my parameters. You describe them as best you can, what you're looking for, what's required, etc. And so when the user starts chatting with the interface, that what it does is starts trying to map it to those functions that it knows about. So it'll start asking follow-up questions like, I need the channel name or whatever. It's smart enough to kind of help navigate the user. I know that there used to be chat apps where you had to like be very specific in defining these flows, but you just provided the functions, and Gen AI is smart enough to kind of map the user towards those things. And I'll be demonstrating this today. So this is all happening server side as well. So the the chat app is you're chatting with it. It's knowledgeable about the functions behind the scenes. You're not having to send it to the user is not having to send those functions obviously to the LLM. As it fills those in, once it comes up with once it figures out which function you're trying to call and it's figured out enough details about your request, it will basically come back with here's the function and here's the parameters to pass to that function. And then automatically behind the scenes, all server side, with outside the user purview, um, it'll it'll run that function for you. And so then whatever the result of that function is then passed back out to OpenAI or your LLM as well. And then, whatever the response is. So one thing I was playing around with that's cool with this is I have a list function. I can ask it to output web templates and then put it in table format. So all of that's possible with this kind of flow because it calls a function, but then because I'm asking, it's taking the JSON data that's returned and turning it into a table. And so it's pretty cool stuff. Right. One other thing I'm going to demonstrate today is a Sitecore Assistant. This is really just a tool that I built to facilitate this this OpenAI use case with the Personalize SDK, but it represents kind of a new way of working with XM Cloud and some of the composable products is about building another app that just integrates with the APIs. The limited application is not available, so it's coming soon at some point. Obviously, it was going to have OpenAI access to my API, so it was going to have to limit the requests or something like that. But this app just represents if you wanted to build some cool integrations with XM Cloud or anything like that, or the chat app that exists within this. It's just working with Sitecore Personalize today, but you could build it to work with the authoring APIs for XM Cloud, or you could use Content Hub 1 or maybe some connect or whatever the use case may be. I have grand schemes here of where this could go, but this is where the current thing is at. So let's do the demo. So the first thing is I'll get the developer token. I'll load up the Sitecore Assistant, I'll add that developer token. I'll show how to do that. And then we'll walk through the chat use case with OpenAI. And let's see how I want to do this. Nope. All right. So, like I said, the first thing is in the way. Let's make it a little bigger. So the first thing is I want to get the SDK or the developer token. So I'll navigate back over to Personalize. Let me refresh because this has probably been sitting open for a while. All right. So to get the client ID and secret that we'll need for the SDK, we can go over to the Developer Center and click on API keys. And you can see I created one yesterday for testing, but I'll create another one. And so I'll just call this SUG for number 2. And because you have basically options of what access you want this API key to have access to. In our case, we want multiple resources, which basically gives it access to kind of CRUD operations to almost everything. So let's do that. And I'll delete this key after this presentation in case anybody copies it real quick. And put this in just my notepad real quick. All right, so with that, now we'll jump over to the Visual Studio. And I don't know if this needs probably, I don't know how to make it bigger. What I was pressing, but anyways, let's just make it a little bigger. There we go. So, all right. So in here, I mean, we're not doing too much in here at the moment. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up the Sitecore Assistant. So all I'm going to do is just do an npm run dev. This repository, I haven't provided the link to it, but it is open source as well. So if you want to see how the AI stuff works, you can definitely do that. Or if you want to clone it and make your own tool that works with Personalize or something else, you can definitely do that as well. All right, we'll give that a few seconds here. Right. So the way this tool works is that you have the ability to add the clients to the app. And what I mean by that is that there could be various clients that you might have to find. What I wanted to do is have a way that you could, as a user, just have a way to just add clients. Maybe you have clients for your personal stuff, and then maybe you have some customer stuff where you want to do some actions on that. You can load it all up in this tool. That means that we have to store the keys in some way. What I'm doing is just storing them in session storage. It does mean that your keys sometimes get lost after a while, so you have to re-add them at some point. But I didn't want to store them anywhere because, then there's all the security concerns of storing people's keys. So this app just stores them in session storage, so then I don't have to worry about security issues with storing in a database or something like that. So the way it works is I can then add a client. I'll add a Sitecore, a client for Sitecore Personalize. Environment doesn't really matter right now. My thoughts on this originally was to build a migration tool for this, but I see Sitecore's beat me to the punch, and they have migration of assets in Sitecore Personalized today. There might still be use cases for automating that, but we'll see if I still build that or not. So now I'm just going to add stuff for this. I don't have any need for the organization ID right now. That's probably more of a Exxon Cloud thing. So I'll just fill in the client ID and secret I just got from the developer from the keys I just created. And so I add that in. And now it's just defined there. Now, when I added that, it added a few things in the navigation. It added the migrate assets, which I haven't built out yet, and it added the chat at the bottom. So once I click on the chat, it's basically just an AI assistant that has been loaded with the functions that are possible. So one thing I can ask it is, what options do I have here? And so the functions that I've provided to it are the ability to create an experience. And it shows all the parameters it's looking for. I also have the ability to get an experience or experiment definition. That would be a single experience or experiment definition. Or I can get back a list. Some of these don't work very well. Like this one only returns 2 experiences, and they're not exactly. they're not exactly perfect at this point. So, but this one I've built out quite a distance. So let's ask it a few more things. Like I could say, uh, I'd love to create a web experience today. And so now it asks me specific things that it's looking for, just because it knows it's trying, I'm saying I want to fit into this specific function it knows about. And then I can say, and so what I'm trying to get it to do is actually create the HTML and CSS JavaScript for me. And so that's what it's now recommending. It's saying, here's the HTML that it could create. This is the CSS. This is the JavaScript. Um, this is some of those details. And now it says, please confirm the name for the experience and let me know if you're okay with the suggested HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Now, there's some issues with some of this. I still have some work to do to make sure it suggests things that work better with Sitecore Personalize itself. It is making sure that the JavaScript is ECMAScript 5, which is what works well with Personalize, but it would be great if you could specify template variables and things like that as well. Or you could come back and say, hey, can you add a parameter or a variable for the name of the H2 or something like that? So some of that I still am working on, but really shows what's possible. So for here, I'm just going to call this Jaipur demo experience. And let's see what it does. All right. It says your personalization experience, Jaipur demo experience has been created successfully. This web experience includes a pop-up that will display a discount message to users if you need further, blah, 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 blah. So basically what this did is it found all the parameters it needed to fill in the function to create an experience. Then it runs the SDK that has, it passes in these functions into the SDK and then it creates that experience. And to prove that that actually did that, and it's not just smoke and mirrors, we can navigate back over to the experiences over here. And we can see that our SUG Jaipur number 2 has created Jaipur demo experience. And you can see it's created the default variant and it's placed in the HTML. It's also placed in the CSS. There is a bug where it doesn't place JavaScript. I haven't figured out why that is, but this is something I'm just going to continue to iterate on, and really shows the potential possibilities of the SDK, just the ability to create these on the fly. I have grand schemes with this, which I'll talk about in the next few slides of the presentation. I think I lost my. Second. I'll start this. I guess I'll just start here. But yeah. Hold on 1 second. Bear with me. All right. So we just did this, and then so That was a great use case of using Gen AI for this, but there's also more possibilities for the SDK as well. Serialization is the obvious one. This was what I originally created it for. For those that aren't familiar, what I mean by serialization, it was the ability to create the assets, let's say a template, web template, or a decision template, create that in local source control in VS Code or whatever your choice tool is. And then when you commit those changes, it automatically would deploy those changes to your tenant. So that's the kind of capabilities that are possible. And the SDK kind of enables that kind of flow. Um, the other one is migrations. Obviously, Sitecore just came out with the ability where you can go into a specific asset and deploy that. It's still limited because you have to do it kind of one-on-one. But if you wanted to do a mass migration, then you could use the serializer to or the SDK to do that. Another one is integrations. So if you had another tool, maybe you had, you know, some other CMS or something, and you wanted to create experiences on the fly based on some sort of action, then you have the ability to do that now with the SDK. And then the end result of where I'm really wanting to take this, my dream, I guess, of a couple of years ago, is some sort of marketplace recipes tool. So I presented on creating pattern and profile cards in Sitecore Personalize earlier this year. The problem with that presentation was that you have to do so many custom, changes inside Sitecore Personalized to enable that flow. So it was really unachievable for most people unless they were really, they had a customer and they really wanted to use pattern profile cards. It was really unattainable to do that specific use case. But my thoughts here is that with the SDK, you could have these kind of recipes or templated out solutions. And so you could use the SDK to then have a way to deploy those into a tenant. So you could have a pattern profile cards for personalize recipe, and then you could deploy that into personalize. And then if you paired that with other APIs of the composable products, um, such as XM Cloud, you could deploy multiple things all at the same time. You could deploy stuff to XM Cloud and to personalize, or to connect or whatever. You could deploy a bunch of things at the same time using these recipes. So some helpful resources. I alluded to this earlier. The first link is definitely the one to get because that one links you to a page where it will have my slides. They're not there yet, but I will be adding them today. And it has a bunch of links to other blogs I've written that are similar to this topic. And I will be adding more. I mentioned, there's another topic that I wanted to release this week that was specifically talking about how the function calling stuff was working, it's kind of like a deep dive into how you define a function call with OpenAI's Node SDK, and how I defined all those. And so that might be a really interesting blog if you're interested in doing more function calling for other use cases. I think it opens the door for so many possibilities. Um, and then if you're interested in the SDK itself, that's available on NPM, and link to the docs for the REST APIs that are behind the scenes of the SDK. If you want to learn more about them, I don't have the link here for the Sitecore assistant, but you can ping me about it, or I'll add that to this deck, and before I put it up on my first link. Yeah. And that's it. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, there are some questions in the comment. Can you please have a look?
Yes. Let me 1 second. Not 1 second. There we go. All right. Questions. how can you do, so the first question is, how can we do component level personalization as it's having page targets? I do know, it's a tricky question. So component level personalization, I do know was on Sitecore's roadmap. They do plan on having a way to do that. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to do that, but um, because it's tricky with the way that it currently works with XM Cloud specifically. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so actually, what I heard is like for XM Cloud, they have page level personalization, the default rules they have given, and then they told that if you need more, deep level personalization, so you should use Sitecore Personalize, and definitely component personalization is in their roadmap. But like I was not sure, like can we do that through Sitecore Personalize, or currently it's only page level?
It's current, well, I mean, Sitecore Personalize enables pretty much anything. But I will say the way it integrates with XM Cloud, there's definitely a gap there right now. I had a long chat with Martin Miles on the Sitecore Personalize channel a couple months ago where he was looking for a good approach to where, because once you buy Sitecore Personalize, it doesn't really integrate well with the same sort of way that XM Cloud works with the the middleware and the auto kind of the personalization on the edge and all that kind of capabilities. It doesn't really work the same. You have to kind of go once you buy personalized and you want to use personalized capabilities, you really have to do it the personalized way, which is completely different than the XM Cloud way. And the biggest complaint was that if you're a content editor, now you have to learn a new tool because it's not going to be done the same way as that. So long answer to that is that uh, I I don't know what Sitecore's plan is for that exactly. I mean I think they're going to have to solve something there, maybe fundamentally change the way, because the way that it was done for page personalization is it's very hard to shift that to component level. That's probably why they're pushing it off, or moving it back. Is that I'm not exactly sure how they would implement that. So yeah, I mean, it's an unfortunate thing, but really, if you have a customer that wants to do component level, there's a couple of options, and I talked about these a little bit. Sarah Riley had something on this, and that is she had like a wrapper component where you would call a full stack trigger or full stack interactive experience. Basically, you call an API and say make a decision, and then that wrapper would return the contents of of what's in there. But there's no official stance of where or how you would exactly do this. So for now, that's just uh, where it stands. I do want to build a POC of how it could be done, but I would have to. Um, I will eventually get to it. Somebody's eventually going to get to it, I think.
Yeah, I guess we have to, because currently in one of my project they extensively use component level personalization, and the content authoring team itself very versed into that, and they do that personalization rule, and through that many pages work. So yeah, definitely we want some solve for that.
Yeah, I totally. I mean, I like the fact that I don't work for Sitecore anymore because I can be a little bit more critical about this part, whereas I would might have just kept my mouth shut before. Just the fact that they need to solve this specific component level personalization, but also how does Sitecore Personalize work with XM Cloud or with other scenarios as well, like I mean, I guess from an XP, but the XP they need to have like some built-in personalization rules that use personalize. They're leaving a lot to the customer or to the partner to figure out, and I think they should have a stance on what the recommended approach is.
Sure.
So you said now we have session trait. What is it, and is this SDK can be used for it? So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by session trait. I do know something about session trait, but I don't know if it's
Yeah, it's like basically for analytics. So like we can use it to have the analytics data at one place, and then I guess that's it. What I know till now.
is that the new feature that they're is
Yeah.
that yeah. I haven't seen it publicly, but yeah, so there was talk about traits. And the last I remember of them, it was kind of like this concept of rolling up like a bunch of attributes inside CDP into one value. I saw a great use case for that for the pattern profile cards is to calculate what pattern or what pattern card a user would be assigned to. You'd have to roll up well, you'd have to manually roll up everything into one variable, or you'd have to come up with another way to do this. But the traits feature, if I'm remembering it correctly, there was another one that they were working on as well, but I don't remember if they were going to replace it with traits or not. But traits and everything like that, it's all guest profile specific, so it wouldn't really relate to this SDK. Unless it's a so there is a few assets that sit inside CDP currently, like audience export and guest uh, guest segmentation and things like that. I don't currently have those as part of the SDK. I haven't seen audience or the trait stuff yet, but I assume that's a JavaScript script that it runs at some sort of interval to or on session end or something like that to kind of compile everything into one you know guest field. Um, so if that's is an asset, I haven't seen it, but if that is an asset that does exist, at some point I do plan on covering CDP scenarios as well. So batch segmentation, audience export, um, other. I think there's some other ones. They have some templates in there as well. So yeah, I don't have it in there today, but I will at some point. Although it kind of it's the naming that always bothers me because it's called the Sitecore Personalize SDK, but I used to call the serializer the CDP serializer. But really, it's just one thing that does both products, really, or at least manages the assets of the products. But um, I'll worry about naming later. Not got much doc related to how to code programmables, decision model, JavaScript code. I agree with that. Especially conditions. They are notoriously painful. Yeah, so the JavaScript code for those, I've written a blog about that. I might have linked to it in my article. I don't remember if I did.
Yeah, I have that link of your blog where you talked about that AI, right? You used AI to generate that code, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, I agree that there needs to be a lot more examples out there on how you write these. So some of what I'm teaching the AI to do is there's a very specific type of JavaScript that is needed for creating this JavaScript inside Sitecore Personalize. It is based on ECMAScript 5, which is I know really outdated, and it's used in the behind the scenes. They use Java, and they use a very specific like templating engine for the JavaScript. It's called Nashorn. Shorn something. And so when I'm instructing the AI, I'm basically telling it, hey, only suggest JavaScript that is in this format. So it is helpful to, if, yeah, I did talk about that. It's coming back to me now. I talked about how I possibly talked about this when I was creating the pattern profile cards stuff. Because I need to suggest JavaScript that would work with Sitecore Personalize. So that's kind of my goal with this is at some point I would like it. Right now it's suggesting JavaScript, but it's not really giving you a chance to see what it's creating until it's already in the product. But I'd like to have it maybe more like vo.dev where it suggests something and then it gives you the ability to like modify it and stuff. That's a crazy dream, but yes, it does need to be more documented. There is some docs on it, but it doesn't help necessarily, especially in some cases, like conditions where it doesn't always work then with XM Cloud, or it doesn't always work with their own tools. When it says it works, it doesn't work. So things like that. So
Yep. So definitely we'll wait some blog from your side for this. That will really help.
yeah, and then this tool eventually, it's something I'm gonna continue working on. Right, basically, I'm working on the SDK and the Sitecore Assistant kind of at the same time, and then I blog about whatever I add to it. And I do plan on releasing 4 more blogs this year. And the next one is on just the function calling stuff and talking about how I did a lot of that. But I do plan on doing some more into like because I showed a very simple use case today where you type in that you want it to generate some code for you, but I don't know if it was really good solid Sitecore personalized code. And I want to build it so it can generate more realistic examples from Gen AI. So you can ask it to build a pop-up and it actually is realistic, workable. I didn't show you that. I didn't show you if it worked or not because I don't think it does. So that's the iterations I'll be making on the tool.
No problem. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? I think we're
Yeah, we are on
at.
time and we don't have any questions. So if you guys have any question, you can reach out to Dylan on Slack. He's always available. He's also a very active community member. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Dylan, and we appreciate your participation and engagement in the Sitecore user group Jaipur. A special thanks to you for sharing your valuable thoughts with us, and we hope you found this session inspiring, informative, everyone. And looking forward to see you at the next gathering of the Sitecore user group via Jaipur soon. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shalin. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.